Okay, so in this video, I will continue with the discussion about the two extremes that we have on positivism and interpretivism. But for this, I want to discuss it on different dimensions, but these dimensions are very weird names. Probably, I don't know if you have ever heard. But I want to discuss the assumptions from each of the paradigms to maybe give you a better example of what's going on. First, I will start with this ontological assumption. An ontology, a very strange word, that's what I mean. Ontology is a field from philosophy that focuses on answering to this question, what is reality? So an ontological assumption is the assumption of what is real. And that is very important when we think about our research. I hope that later we will see examples, but I hope that you can start connecting the dots a little bit. The ontological assumption of positivism says that reality exists independently of whatever we do. Like if I die, reality will continue without any issue. Interpretivism is the other way around. Interpretivism, as I said in the last video, assumes that reality is constructed by interpretations. So if I do something, or if I don't do something, or if I change my mindset, reality is going to be affected by that because reality is constructed by interpretations. So this ontological assumption is super important. I will give more examples later, but think about a phenomenon where reality is already in there and we just want to discover. And think about reality in a different way, reality where we construct it. Think about, for example, in here, something that is very objective, like maybe the rain. If we want to measure rain, if we want to discover how much rain comes depending on certain variables, that seems to be very objective, it will rain. But what about a reality that is constructed through interpretations? Like maybe, for example, anxiety can be something that is not totally factual, is very based on interpretations. The concept of anxiety is a concept that exists because of interpretations. So try to think about these examples. Then we move to another dimension of assumptions, which is another strange word, epistemology. And epistemology is also a branch from philosophy that focuses on answering to this question. One, what constitutes valid knowledge? Because when we want to study something, we need to construct knowledge. And the epistemological assumption is very important because it will help us to decide which knowledge is valid or not. So let's continue with examples. In the positivist paradigm, we assume that the knowledge that comes from observable and measurable data or a positive test, it is valid knowledge. That is very, very important. If we want to understand something that exists, that we want to discover, we need to do it through data that comes from very objective data. It's a very objective reality. We need very objective data. The opposite, the interpretivism view, is if we want to understand anxiety as interpretations, then we need knowledge that comes from subjective interpretations, not from a different type of data, very numeric or objective. If we decide, or if we assumed that anxiety is an interpretation, then we need to collect data and we need to create knowledge from data that has interpretations, very rich data in terms of interpretations and perceptions, all of these things. Here I can also, if we want to make a quick parenthesis, maybe you are thinking, what if we assume that anxiety is a very biological phenomenon, something that is in our brains, like depending on the brain activity, the electric activity in our brain, that decides, it's not subjective, it's totally objective. Maybe there is something that makes your brain work in a certain way that triggers anxiety, and everything is electric, everything is in the brain. Interpretations don't matter, everything is in your brain. If that is your assumption of that reality, if that is your assumption of anxiety, you are in the positivist paradigm, because you assume that anxiety happens because of a biological thing, like the interpretation doesn't matter, it is what is in your brain. So if you want to study anxiety from that perspective, then you need knowledge from data that is very objective and measurable. So maybe you will measure the electric activity in there. So you can see even the same thing can be seen from the two perspectives, the interpretivism and the positivism. And now probably you are thinking, what if it is a combination of both? What if there are certain objective things like neural activity, and maybe the way the brain is structured also plays a role, but also interpretations, maybe it's a mix. So that's why it's a paradigm, because this is a very extreme version, but especially in social sciences, most of what we study in social sciences is somewhere in between. And we will talk about that in a second. But for now, I think it's easier if we only focus on the extremes to understand just the extremes, and then later we will talk about what's in between. Then we also have the axiological assumption. And axiology is another strange word, and also branch from philosophy, that focuses on answering to this question: what is valuable, and what is the objective? Not what is objective. What is the objective? So what is valuable? That's basically the question, the answer, the question to that this tries to answer. So what is valuable in the positivist paradigm, the objective of the positivist paradigm, is to discover, to predict, to control, or again, try to write these keywords in your notebook. And from the interpretivist, the objective, or what is valuable, is different. Understanding is very valuable. Context, processes, this is what is valuable in the other side. Then we have rhetorics. And I think rhetorics is not from philosophy, it's probably from another science. But what rhetorics aims to answer is what language to use. We will have one lecture on how to communicate, which language we need to use. But I can give you some hints from now. In the positivism, since we don't like, we assume that that happens without our interpretation, without subjectivity, that everything is very objective. We try to use passive voice, and we try to use the third person because we want to stay away. Probably that's how you wrote your reports in high school on biology or something like that, because that is the root or the core of biology and these sciences from high school. But in the interpretivism paradigm, is the opposite. We want to show that we are there, so you can say, I did interviews, or we did interviews. We analyzed the data. You need to show that the data was subjectively analyzed and not objectively. So be sure that you more or less think about it. And the last thing, and this is what matters, what is so important for this course, is that there is also a methodological assumption, and that is, what methodology should I use? And quick answer, in positivism is quantitative methods, in interpretivism is qualitative methods. And maybe you can ask, what happens if I am in the middle point? What if I assume that this is something that is somehow objective, but somehow subjective? Well, maybe the answer is maybe a mixed method approach, where you test a few things that are objective, but at the same time it's important that you understand the interpretation. And I can give you a spoiler, because for the assignment for this course is going to be something that falls in between. That is a little bit of objectivity, but also subjectivity is very important. So before we move to the examples, I want to show you this table, where, because I said many times, it's a spectrum, it's not a coin where you have two sides, it's a spectrum. So I think this is a good example of the spectrum. You have a very extreme version of positivism, like reality is a concrete structure, nothing affects it. But then, if that is your case, then here are some assumptions and the methods that you can use. If you are totally interpretivist, then you can link it to this. And I think in your case, you will be, I don't know, something in between here. In most of the cases, you are not very extreme in your assumptions. Well, if you are still confused, don't worry, it's normal. I will give you more examples in the next video, and then we will talk about connection to methods, which is, I think, also very, very nice.